All right, so for this week's performance talk, we wanted to go, I guess, a little bit off script or off brand here and talk kind of more lifestyle strategies and applications here, and specifically wanting to speak about momentum and how it can be influential in two different directions, both positively and negatively. This is a kind of a derivative of something I think about a lot, and that's like scientific principles as they're applied in real life matters, so to speak. So in this sense, as geeky as that sounds when I say it out loud, as it applies to here, we would think like Newton's law: an object in motion stays in motion, or an object at rest stays at rest until an external force is acted upon it. So with our day-to-day lifestyle and careers and endeavors, relationships, everything kind of starts to become more automated the older you get. You have more consistencies and there's less undulation to your life. So that can provide a strong incentive or inclination for us to want to tend to default towards autopilot and minimizing any kind of extraneous thought. We want to try to keep everything as funneled as possible, where there's no variability to our life. What this does by default then is creates barriers, which then creates expectations. But sticking to the point here, we are fundamentally designed to do two things at root, and that is to survive and adapt. The survival piece is more of like the what's most effective strategies, or what is just going to get the job done, what is needed, whereas the adaptation piece is going to speak more to the efficiency, where we're thinking more sustainability and longevity. Everything that we do is prompted by change. There has to be some kind of intersection or entanglement that has to be present in order for us to make decisions. If everything were always net neutral, we would never have to make a decision that would create an up or down outcome. Unfortunately, it's just not the way it is. So what ends up happening is when you hear people say shit like I'm stuck in a rut, or the common euphemisms, when it rains it pours. So if it's not one thing, it's another. It's always one thing after another. Things like this are just kind of a distorted perspective on really just the reality of the situation, where you can always retroactively look back and suggest that things were more or less in your favor based on how you want to view them. But with the day-to-day work, what we need to do is recognize that we are always going to be motivated by an optimal outcome. So we're kind of conditioned into trying to avoid resistance or conflict or failure or anything of the likes, because we're trying to preserve the emotion that comes with that. Well, what that does is that interferes or disrupts your ability to create momentum in your day-to-day, and making the mundane things not only just inviting, but also aggregate over time so that they produce some type of tangible return. What we're going to kind of work from with all of this is looking at it as energy conservation versus energy expenditure. So whether that be mental, physical, emotional, there's only so much bandwidth for everybody. And so what you need to do is identify kind of where your endpoints are, and where you tend to fluctuate in between on these different channels, so that you can learn how to become more efficient with it. And with efficiency comes momentum. So with all that being said, what do you got?
I think that a lot of it, or the root of a lot of it, comes down to decisions, especially when you're feeling a downward kind of shift in your momentum, in your attitude, in your day-to-day life, and you're kind of feeling like, well, one thing goes wrong, and then it's another thing, and then it's another thing, and then you're spiraling down this hole, and you don't really know how to get out of it until you kind of look back retroactively at what you've got going on. But at that point in time, you're so far past that point that your body has now adapted to its current situation, your mind has adapted to its current situation, and you're kind of like living in that kind of vortex of just shit. And it's not until you kind of decide to make a change that you're going to be able to pull yourself out of it. There has to be some type of action. And I think that's where people get caught up, because they're so they're so used to living in that monotonous day-to-day life that they're just like, well, my life's trash and everything sucks and this is where I'm at. But if they actually actively make a decision to do something better, then they're going to just as easily see that uptick in things occur, you know?
So I think this is like kind of, it speaks to both the anxiety and the depression crowd. Not to, get clinical or label it, but always having to try to channel, how you're feeling intrinsically at all times, and being very sensitive to detecting change.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know for myself personally, I've now lived with my anxiety long enough that I have physical triggers as well, not even just intrinsically, but I know when I start, picking at the calluses on my hands, that there's something going on. So whether I've recognized it yet or not intrinsically as to what's actually driving that anxiety, physically, I have little things and little triggers that I'm doing that's kind of signaling to my brain, like, hey, you need to kind of look deeper and take a look at something and see what's going on and try to, work through it before I get to the point of having an anxiety attack or a breakdown and things like that.
So again, on both ends of this spectrum, whether it's, the high frequency or the low frequency crowd, both tend to have a real bad problem with accumulation, right? Always letting things pile up and pile up and pile up to the point where you either ignore it or you've normalized dealing with a lot of weight or pressure or stress. But in either case, the outcome being at some point being overloaded or, kind of overstimulated.
Yeah.
So the tying this back to the momentum piece, all of these things really boil down to single factor decisions. I've always believed that we're present nothing more than the accumulation of decisions that we've made over time. Good shit and bad shit happens to everybody. There's of course different magnitudes and ratios to that, but broadly speaking, you're just the byproduct of your own decisions. So what I've tried to focus on more in the last few years has been, rather than going back to the extremism and just trying to do whatever's necessary to finish and complete whatever it is that needed to be done at the time. Now I've gotten to a point where I can just piece my workout, 20 minutes here, 30 minutes here, kind of throughout the day and then throughout the week, and just have a very steady ebb and flow where I know things are going to get done. It's not going to be right now. That's okay. And that helps me to kind of maintain a rhythm with like my weekly layout schedule. And it makes the mundane and the habitual nature to it, very dynamic, because even though I'm doing the same shit all the time, at the same times, the material or the focus is constantly changing. So it keeps it really saturating,
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that routines aren't bad. It's not bad to have a routine. It's not bad to have some sort of monotony, because if you have those little moments where you are switching things up or moving things around more dynamically based on your schedule for the week, or based off of, friends coming into town, or, having a dinner that you might go to that kind of throws off your schedule, so that you have some dynamic in there. But routines aren't necessarily a bad thing until you're so far entrenched in that routine that you feel buried by it.
Right. And I know obviously different shit works for different people. Like it's going to be, a fluctuating thing based on a number of variables, but I know extremely successful people who are disorganized, lazy as shit, up and down, don't really, overtly work themselves, and they're doing great. And then others are religious to everything they do and are struggling. So, I mean, we're not trying to generalize any of this, but the key concepts like of decision making and then establishing a rhythm with your decision making is what I've personally found to be extremely helpful, not only just combating like depressive tendencies and anxiety and whatnot, but also just to creating more like vigor, or like, again, saturation is a word I come to a lot with my work and the personal interest and whatnot, like running our business. Like, you find different ways to continue to like challenge yourself along the way, but doing it with, bigger picture outcome or tangible outcome.
Yeah.
Once we got to that point, then it turned into the efficiency thing, which I was going to say for you is like, or for us is probably your thing where, we both have gotten very good with just almost processing the way we're doing things, everything from programming to meal prepping to our training schedule, and then how we're working our, personal schedules around it. Like it's made the whole process a lot easier because I think we were very strategic.
I agree. And I think that that's a big thing to recognize for people is you're in control of your decisions. Nobody else is making those decisions except for you. So for us, we know that if we don't have meal prep lunches during the week, that's going to throw our entire week off. Everyone's like, I want to do this and I want to do that. Then make the decision to do that. Take control of your decisions and your actions because nobody else is making those decisions for you. The biggest thing that I hate is I just can't. Well, but why? Like, unless you're in some type of physical or emotional harm, there's no reason that you can't decide to do something that you do or don't want to do.
Right. Yeah. And again, another one I've always tried to live by and preached is everything is voluntary. Mm-hmm. There's just outcomes or consequences to those voluntary decisions. And then you do an analysis. Is this worth what I could potentially get or what could potentially come my way based on that? Bringing that all together, I think I wanted to specifically touch on kind of how to reverse the cycle when you start to feel like you're getting tunneled into just negative thing after negative thing happening or setback after setback. The biggest thing is to absolutely never run from it. Running from problems only leads you to additional problems. Mm-hmm. So you have to be proactive with facing it and figuring out some sense of strategy. So always shoot for just trying to change one chip, get one victory, and then stack victories, just little things that start moving you in the right direction. And remember, one of the key things to having our dopamine hits or dopamine response is successful outcome, right, from a physiological perspective. So then from there, you have to be very, strict to prioritize what you have going on because, if you don't have order with what your level of significance or importance is or what the priority of these things is, then you look at everything as equal, which makes the cumulative project or task look bigger than it actually is. Yeah. You have to weight your different, tasks or things that you have to do so that you can accomplish the ones that matter first before you start to hit that phase of burning out or overdoing it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember everything seems like it's equally important. Everything seems like it 100% has to get done or the world is going to end. And
mowing the lawn when your house is on fire.
You have to be willing to take a step back and look at what you're doing and analyze and make sure that you're doing what's right and necessary for that moment to allow yourself to feel better, because then you're going to continue to climb up that ladder.
And that's where you want to capitalize on the positive momentum or, again, as an old adage being strike while the iron's hot. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. If you feel something intuitively, if it's one of those days where you just feel great, like get after it. Yeah. And really put everything into it because that will feed again into the following days, mm-hmm. and then into the next projects or whatever it may be. So last little note to leave you with, don't aim for perfect, just aim for better. I think everybody to a degree who's at least, an ambitious person in nature is going to have tendencies for perfectionism and extremism. Just always aim for better. It's never going to be perfect. Doesn't need to be. It just needs to be, and then just do a little bit better, a little bit more than you've done in the past. And then lastly, have a short-term focus with a long-term gaze. I think the overwhelming side of it is when people try to just exclusively isolate what the big picture is. And I think it's tough to do for anybody in any situation. But have a general idea of where you want to be or what you're working towards or what something could become for you. Always have that in mind when you're filtering decisions, but put your emphasis or concentration on what is and can be done now.